Whether you're rich or poor, having healthcare should be a right.
Hey, I'm Igor Volsky.
I'm Michelle Jawando.
Welcome back to Thinking Cap. This week, we're bringing you a special interview with Neera, Tanden, the president here at the Center for American Progress, about a very urgent issue. Because we've been watching the same reports you've been watching about
Trump care.
And Senate Republicans getting ready to vote on a bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act that, like, I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, Michelle?
I haven't seen it. Actually, if I was a healthcare executive and I worked in an insurance company, I would have seen it.
You would have seen it.
Because those are the only people who've seen the bill.
They've been consulted.
Yeah, they have been consulted.
Nobody else.
But constituents?
Nope.
That would be a no. Hospitals?
Nope.
Anybody from the Democratic Party in the United States Senate?
No.
Yeah. So I think we have a problem, Igor.
We have a problem. We are going to be repealing a law that has given health care to some 20 million people, just taking it away and replacing it with this theory that if you let the free market really work, just let it rip, that the people who need health care, the people who have chronic conditions, who we spend a lot of money as an economy treating them and making them better, that they will somehow find this health care insurance all on their own. Now, you know, I started my career in healthcare here at the Center for American Progress. I came on as a healthcare reporter, and I covered the Affordable Care Act from the 2008 election, from when it was just a dream in one president's eye.
I don't think I knew this,
Yes.
Igor, that you were the healthcare reporter.
Healthcare reporter Igor, they called me.
That's right.
And all the way to when it finally became law in 2010, March 23rd, 2010. And I have to tell you, like, an embarrassing story. So it's March
I have a good one, too, for that day.
Oh, okay, great. So I'll go first. So March 23rd, 2010, President Obama, President Obama is having his big signing ceremony. What room is that? The one with the golden curtains or the yellow curtains?
In the
Eisenhower? No.
No. It was in the White House. Why am I blanking?
What?
Yeah, the big room.
The big room.
Yeah.
The big room.
My husband's going to get me. Like, you know this room? I know. Yeah.
Well, I'm sitting beneath a TV and I'm watching it. And I'm like, oh, well, you know, I had such a great time covering healthcare. It kind of really put my work into overdrive. I loved following like an active piece of legislation and watch it become law and cover all the politics and the fights and the deep dives into policy and all the drama surrounding Obamacare. But now it's signed into law, so that's over. I need to find a new beat to cover. And I literally, as the president was signing the law and giving out the pens, I G-chatted my editor at Think Progress, and I asked, hey, so now that healthcare is done, do you think like maybe I should be covering the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal fight? Because that was just starting up. That was just heating up.
Yeah.
And that's how I expanded my beat, because
The
I
East
literally
Room.
thought, the East Room.
Ha!
There you go.
There you go. Sorry.
But I literally thought at the time, healthcare is done. I will never touch
You're
it again.
finished.
It's the
Right.
law of the land. We
Right.
now just have to implement it. And boy, was I wrong.
You were so
Because
wrong.
here we are.
Still
9 years
fighting.
later.
That's right.
Still talking about
2 different Supreme Court cases.
Yeah.
I was on the Hill when this was happening. And just the sheer joy of so many of the staffers, including our guest who was on Thinking Cap with us today, Neera Tanden, who were at the White House at the time when this was happening, because it just felt like such a good thing. Like we actually did this
major
thing
accomplishment.
that we have been trying in this country to deal with this issue. You know, and I will just quickly say, and I don't think that I've shared it before, but I have had a number of family members who, but for expansion of Medicaid in the state of Maryland, but for the Affordable Care Act, would have had very different life outcomes. And even the way that they were able to live out the end of their life was with a type of dignity that you give to people when they are struggling, when they are in pain, when they are dealing with chronic illness, when they are dealing with illnesses at the end of their life. And the only reason we had such a great moment and we felt like we were covered and protected as a family was because of this safety net through the Affordable Care Act. And when I think about the fact that there are people, and I'm going to try not to cry, when I think about the fact that I lived in a state that expanded Medicaid, I lived in a state where legislators were behind it, that we lived at a time where a president was committed to this, and there are so many people. And we talk about this as policy, but there are so many people who are going to be adversely affected. And there is nothing worse than when you have family members at some of the lowest moments of life than you can imagine, and there's no way for them to get help. And the ACA gave people an opportunity to have some help. And the fact that these horrible, horrible human beings are going to take this away from 23 million people is just, there's nothing to say.
Yeah, and it's the stories of the people who have benefited from the Affordable Care Act, who are alive today because they were able to purchase health insurance on the exchange or through Medicaid, and then we're able to see a doctor, that drives a lot of the healthcare work here at the Center for American Progress, that motivates Neera Tanden, our guest today, to fight as hard as she has through her entire career to ensure that everyone in this country has access to comprehensive health insurance that is there for them when they need it. Now, the House health care bill that repeals large portions of Obamacare won't just affect the people who enrolled in one of the exchanges or are part of Medicaid expansion. It could even impact the over 160 million Americans who currently have employer-based coverage. So, for instance, my mother is a cancer survivor. She recently had a cancer scare. She needed to go on medical disability in order to deal with that issue. And because of the way the system is structured, there aren't any kind of lifetime caps or annual caps that you hit, after which your insurance says,
we're done
with you.
Yeah.
Tragic part of all of this is that it's one thing to say, I don't think the Affordable Care Act is working. I think we can do healthcare in a better way in this country. We could provide it more efficiently. More people could have it. It could be more available, more portable to people. People shouldn't be able to pay for it. Fine. But then let's have a debate about it.
Let's have that
Let's have a
conversation.
real conversation. If
That's
you don't
right.
like what Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act looks like today, then it's your job to convince me that you have a better idea.
Because what we have right now is helping millions of people.
It's not perfect.
It's not perfect by any means, but it is making a difference. It is keeping people alive.
So without further ado, here is Neera Tanden.
Neera Tanden, the fearless leader of us here at the Center for American Progress, for the first time joining us on Thinking Cap. Thank you, Neera.
Thanks for having me. I just want to make sure clear to everybody that I did not force you to take me.
We did actually ask you to join us this week. For those who may not know Neera, and I don't know where you've been, she serves as the president and CEO, but she's also served as a senior advisor at the Department of Health and Human Services under the Obama administration. She's advised both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on their 2008 campaigns, and we are so excited to have her here today.
Thank you. She actually does seem excited. It's not like she's making that up.
Oh, yeah, Michelle's genuinely
Yeah,
excited.
you know, I'm like always the corny,
Always.
happy one. Sorry.
And then there's Igor.
And then-
Yes, that's right. Well, Neera, we want to talk to you about your experience with Obamacare in 2009, 2010, an issue we both worked on, and now what Republicans are doing to healthcare. But before we do that, let's maybe step back. You know, one of the challenges I think that we all had working on healthcare is really articulating a clear vision for a progressive healthcare plan in this country. I want to give you that opportunity about why, as progressives, why people across America should support universal coverage.
Yeah, I think this is a very simple principle, which is that whether you're rich or poor, whether you come from, a rural part of the country, an urban part of the country, having healthcare should be a right. In the last couple of months, we had this wonderful woman come into this press conference and around Tom Price's nomination. And this woman is, 55 years old. worked at a job where she didn't have health insurance and never had health care or hadn't had health care in so long she could barely remember it. Got coverage in Georgia through the Affordable Care Act. And then the next day went to the doctor, got coverage, and then went to the doctor for the first time in a long time. And the doctor found that she had a lump in her breast and had breast cancer. And she had to have multiple surgeries in order to get rid of her breast cancer. And, she came to this press conference, not very political, but she came to this press conference because she said, and, it's true, she's only alive because she got coverage and was able to see a doctor. She would not have gone to that doctor if she didn't have health care. And that's what we're fighting for today. It's people like to talk about politics and broad numbers and, healthcare costs going up or down. But at the end of the day, the most important thing here is that the decisions the Senate will make will mean, and it's tragic to say this, but people could die. People would die.
They will die.
They will die from this. And the fact that they are so shamed about what they're doing that they won't have a simple hearing where they can be held accountable to some members of the public and want to rush this through because they see some political need to pass this bill to keep up their voters or their base. That is the worst form of politics. That is putting their party over the needs of their constituents, their people who need it the most, their country, and that's why we have to stop them. My hope is over the long term, we can have a debate in this country about how we ensure every single person is covered. Because I do think it really shouldn't matter how much money you have, whether you can afford coverage. At the end of the day, there are people who die in our country, and we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. There are people who die simply because they don't have health insurance, and that is, I think, un-American.
Would love to have you tell us about your history with healthcare, how you came to healthcare, why you worked on this issue, why it's important to you personally.
I actually started working on the policy around healthcare for Hillary Clinton in 1998. I started working on the Domestic Policy Council on the Children and Families team back then, and my first issue I worked on was implementation of the Children's Health Insurance Plan. So just to take everyone back to the dawn of time, we passed a bill in 1997. Republicans and Democrats passed a bill in 1997 to dramatically expand health coverage for children in the United States. So
Wait, Democrats and Republicans?
Can you say that again?
I just want people to know that happened at one time.
It was so great. I then worked on various presidential campaigns where issues around healthcare coverage were always at the forefront. I worked on Hillary's Senate race, and in 2008, I was on her presidential campaign. And then when I worked for then Senator Obama in the general election, I was in charge of healthcare and defending healthcare against McCain's attacks, and also making the case for it. So, and then I was honored to work on the transition on healthcare and ultimately in the Obama White House, where, basically we've been engaged in a long-term struggle to ensure more and more Americans are covered, and was proud to work on the Affordable Care Act, which actually ensured that, millions of Americans had health coverage for the first time.
I can still recite McCain's healthcare plan verbatim. I won't do it here, but I know it well.
Please don't.
It hasn't changed. It's a lot of what Republicans talk about.
Neera, I think, you started this conversation bringing us back to a point in your career where Democrats and Republicans worked together to move healthcare forward in this country. And it seems like we are now diametrically opposed between a Trump care bill that would take 23 million people, would take health care away from 23 million people. And it seems like there's one party that's trying to preserve. How did the parties get so split on something that I think most people would think is fundamental, like access to health care?
The big difference between the 1990s and the Obama presidency, I think, is that in the 1990s, Republicans would pass bills with President Clinton but try to impeach him on the side. So, I think there it was like we had the politics of personal destruction, but people would still go through the legislative process. What we saw with President Obama, which was deeply different than even in the 1990s, was Republicans decided that it was a a positive strategy for them to stop everything that happened. They vilified the Affordable Care Act. They, most importantly, we went through, and I hope we'll get back to this, we went through a regular order process, which took a long time. Many of us working on it wish it didn't take that long, but we took did a regular order. We had a Senate markup, a House markup, multiple committees deliberating, a lot of amendments from both Republicans and Democrats on the bill. And the irony is that, we went through a year-long process, over a year, on the Affordable Care Act, and now they're trying to jam through a bill in a matter of weeks, which, wouldn't be the first time that the Republicans in the Senate were hypocrites on an issue, but it is a clear demonstration of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's important to drill down on. There were 106 hearings when it came to the Affordable Care Act. I mean, I remember watching most of them.
I'm so sorry.
Before you told me to. Before we even got to these hearings, you had these working groups that Senator Max Baucus, the former senator from Montana, put together with Republicans and Democrats. And there were all of these reports about how they were coming together to maybe form a deal, that Baucus really wanted to have a bipartisan markup that he could have in the Senate Finance Committee. I mean, there was real hope at the time. What do you think, though, changed? How do you think we went on this issue that, as you point out with Chip, had bipartisan support? How we went from maybe we can work on health care together in early part of 2009 to forget it, it's going to be a partisan issue?
There was a very clear moment. So so you're absolutely right. People forget this now, but the Senate Finance Committee did these walkthrough documents, which had unanimous support amongst Republicans and Democrats on the committee about the broad outlines of the bill. People are forgetting
individual mandate.
The individual mandate was part of that. It was like in one of those documents where everyone signed on the individual mandate. What happened in the Affordable Care Act is sometime in June, Frank Luntz did a memo saying that if the Affordable Care Act passes and it has bipartisan support, it will be disastrous for Republicans because people will see President Obama as a success and they will lose at the next election. He put out that memo, and then he put out descriptions of how to take it on and attack it. And really what happened was Republicans decided to make the Affordable Care Act a fully partisan issue, which always dragged down support for the bill. And then when the bill passed, they made every effort to make it fail. And, with very little awareness that when you hurt the Affordable Care Act, you were hurting people's coverage. Like they owned that. They never owned that. They never felt any responsibility for it. And, truthfully, they spent the last 8 years, or 6.5, 7 years, talking about having having a replacement plan, which they never actually had. They had no responsibility about that either. And so now we're hurtling through a process which has, no voice in the Senate. No member of the public is going to be able to testify. No one who's going to lose health care coverage is going to testify. No one who is going to be subject to pre-existing conditions for the first time is going to testify. Nobody in any part of this country is going to be able to testify, which is unprecedented for a piece of legislation, a small piece of legislation, let alone a piece of legislation that will affect 1/6 of the economy, will devastate millions of people, and will throw huge hurdles. Even if people have employer-based coverage, it's going to affect those people as well. So, this is really, I might say this one or two times during this, it's really the time for the public to engage in this process is now. The time to call your members of Congress is now. The time to drive over to your district offices of your senators is now. Get with your friends. Do what you can to stop this tragedy before it happens.
So, Neera, you've worked in the Senate for then Senator Hillary Clinton, who is my home state senator, New York all day, represent. I've worked in the Senate. I remember vividly the Tea Party folks who would come up while we were in the middle of the healthcare debate and would like camp out in our front office and would not leave until we came out and spoke to them about this bill. And that was their attempt to get us to vote against. And obviously that's not where my then boss, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, was, but they were dogged. So what do you tell people right now? Because I think there was a lot of great action the first iteration around, but I don't know if it is just this chaos and distraction of this administration that they can get us paying attention on one thing, and so then we don't pay attention on Trump care right now. What do you tell people to really get in the face of senators? How do you get people back engaged in this fight right now?
Yeah, this is a great question. My own view is that the Republicans in the Senate recognize that what really is fueling the resistance in the country, and what I'm most optimistic about, is that there are more people engaged in opposition to the Affordable Care Act today than the Tea Party. More people are going to district offices, more people are going to town halls, more people are calling in than we experienced back then. And the other side was pretty vocal back then, but we're seeing greater engagement even earlier in the process. What I think is really happening is that Republicans have, for the most part, recognized that a lot of that resistance is to Trump himself. And so they're trying to bifurcate. Everything on this is behind closed doors. They're not holding any hearings or having few press conferences. They want to essentially have very minimal public discussion and then spring this on the American people in like 1 week, and then have every amendment on the floor and just be done with it, which is outrageous if you think that the whole legislative process is about actually hearing the input of the public.
Yeah, otherwise we'd have a dictator. He'd put something in place and be done with it.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, the whole theory, the idea that they would have a bill that has such consequences for people in every state of this country. People are going to lose coverage they've come to rely on. People who have expected that their private insurers will cover pre-existing conditions will be thrown out of that. And you might have a child who has asthma. In a few years, that child will have a hard time getting health care because of this bill. And they don't want to have those voices in the process. What we did in the Affordable Care Act was had multiple hearings where you heard from people. Sometimes it wasn't so fun, but you heard from people.
Sometimes.
You heard from people who opposed the bill. You heard from people who supported the bill. Here, no doctor is going to be able to testify. No nurse is going to be able to testify. No consumer, no patient, no hospital, nobody who has a stake. And one of the reasons why they want that to happen is because almost every group that has a stake in the healthcare system has opposed this bill. The American Medical Association, the nurses, the AARP, the
Don't mess
hospitals.
with the AARP.
I know.
Don't
Well,
mess
they're
with
messing
ARP.
with them.
Don't mess
They're
with ARP.
messing with them right now. So I think that's why it's so critical. They want an asleep America. They want to have the bait and switch. They are drafting this bill right now. They're scoring parts of it. They want to just swoop it onto people and think there's very little time for reaction. And that's why we have to say now, this process is undemocratic. This process is stifling the voices of your voters. You're trying to throw something on people without any discussion with the public, and that is merely wrong. It's simply wrong. And honestly, call your members of Congress now. Call your senators now. If you have friends in red states, urge them to call their senators. And I think it's a very simple message, which is that destroying the Affordable Care Act will mean you will lose coverage for millions of people. People who have coverage today will lose it. People who have employer-based coverage can lose it. And what they're doing is really a travesty. And the reason why they're hiding behind closed doors is they don't want us to see what they'll do.
They can't own up. And that is why she is the president of the Center for American Progress. I'm over here getting all
I didn't make her
emotional.
do that.
No,
I didn't make her do
She
that.
did it, but I'm all tearing up and feeling all revved up again. But we just want to thank you, Neera Tanden, President and CEO
Thank you,
here at the
guys.
Center for American Progress, joining us on Thinking Cap.
You guys rock.
Thanks,
Thank
Neera.
you.
Thank you.
So the best thing you can do right now to stop the Senate from repealing health care, taking insurance away from 23 million Americans, is contact your member of Congress. Go to trumpcaretoolkit.org. There you'll have a whip list of senators who need to hear from you the most. You can tweet at them how many people would lose coverage in their states, but also call their offices. Let them know that they should vote against Trump Care. Thinking Cap is produced by Sally Tucker. Music by Kyle Epson and Jacob Buchanan. Graphics by Matt Ingram. For more, find us at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at AmericanProgress.org, or wherever you want.